Alright everyone, hello, and now today we have another very exciting episode of A Witch Reads Christian Books to figure out why witchcraft is apparently sending me to hell. I will also say that I am a Christian witch, so if you are new here, welcome, thank you for stopping by. If you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, please do so. But otherwise, if you're here before, you know that the last book we looked at was Jennifer LeClair's Exposing Prophetic Witchcraft, which was a whole ride in itself that you can go check out. But this time we're looking at a very different book, and it's a really exciting one to me because it's one that I didn't find myself. I did not go perusing the shelves of Amazon's Christian selection and happen upon this. This was actually recommended to me, and it was recommended to me by someone of its target audience. And so, just to give some background, I'm not just here on YouTube, I'm also on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, and all the time I get comments from, I imagine are well-meaning people, telling me that I cannot be a Christian and a witch, that witchcraft at all is very bad, that all witches are going to hell, and burning forever, and are condemned, and are an abomination, and so on, and so on, and so on. And that's why I'm doing this series right now, to see if maybe any of these Christian leaders, authors, whatever, have anything substantial to say that could potentially change my mind and push back on all of the self-study I've done in my own time with all of my many different academic sources and study and conversation with actual spiritual leaders like priests and all these other folks. But one day, a couple years ago, as I was telling a ex-witch turned Christian, which we've also talked about before, as I was telling them exactly that I've been in the weeds, that I've done my time, that I've done my reading, and that's how a book like Discovering Christian Witchcraft even exists, she turned around with this one, alright? She goes, well, if you like books, I like books. I've read myself a book once or twice before, and you should read this one. And this was apparently the book that convinced her that witchcraft is not viable with Christian thought and practice. Oh, okay. But listen, even though now I'm a professor who teaches research writing and how to, vet sources, get good info, do all that kind of stuff, I did not need to be one to look at this book and know that it was going to be, creative, interesting, but not that credible. Not at all. And I know people say all the time, don't judge a book by its cover, but I mean, come on. Look at this thing. What is this cover? Is that this font? That's the font I used in middle school on all of my cringe, overly edited pictures. And why is V-Lock on it? But nonetheless, I forgot this book existed for a blissful 2 years after that. And it wasn't until I was about to get into my next book for this series that I remembered it and said, oh hey, now is as good a time as ever to get into it and see what this book is about. And boy oh boy did I have a time. Won't say a great time, won't say a bad, pretty close to a bad time, but I sure did have a time with this book. Before we get into it though, we have to talk about some of these things that are on the cover, because if you don't have any background in the things that it says on the cover, this is going to maybe be difficult to understand. So let's get into it. So here's the thing, unlike whatever audience this book was clearly intended for, I am not, and was not, and will not ever be the kind of person to look at things that I don't know or recognize or have any familiarity with and just take someone's word for it unless I can be sure that what they're about to say is unbiased, well-researched, so on and so forth, right? So for me, I know of Santeria, and I know kind of sort of things like Espiritismo, Palo Mayombe, but not nearly enough to go into a book like this without doing some background research on it first. So in order to do my due diligence and right away be able to have something to compare to and see if this guy was making up a crock of I had to go looking for some other sources on what some of these things are. And so what I found mostly came from a couple journal articles, interviewing people part of these practices, some US fact sheets about freedom of religion and religious persecution in Cuba, some independent blogs about stuff, some, you know, basic encyclopedia pages from Encyclopedia Britannica. Like, you know, I tried to find some sources that were kind of unbiased at least, or at least had some reason to paint things more objectively to knowledgeably. I also went on TikTok and I asked folks in this tradition, I said, hey, here's what I know about this, can you help me fill some gaps? And an absolute superhero came and dropped so much extra context that made all of these sources make sense. Nonetheless, if you guys would like to read some of these things, the Bronx article, Herald News article, you know, and everything else, I've linked them in the description, so check those out for just a little bit of extra reading. But otherwise, let me just explain to you a little bit about what they are. Let me tell you what I learned before I dove into this book. So step one is that Santeria is a kind of like an umbrella term for many different types of Afro-Caribbean syncretic religions, or as people commonly know them, African traditional religions. This is a bit of a mouthful, I will admit. However, it's really not that complicated. The history of it is pretty heavy and pretty sad, and that's immediately why I am like red flag number one with this book before I even crack it open. In the end, what this means is that when people were dragged from their respective tribes along the coast of Africa into the Caribbean by the Spaniards and the Portuguese and everyone else involved in the slave trade in the, you know, South American Caribbean islands, they were heavily beaten down, right? And a part of beating them down and suppressing their culture and their language and making sure they had no real way of fighting back, organizing, anything like that, was to also strip them of their languages and their cultures, especially their religious identities, right? We think about Spain, we think about Portugal, these are heavily Catholic countries, and so Catholicism got heavily pushed down on these enslaved people. So in order to be able to hold on to their religious beliefs, their traditions, their ancestral customs, and everything else as they were subjected to such insane cruelty out there in the Caribbeans, they created these syncretic traditions in which they basically took their own gods, their own spirits, their own religions, and just kind of smeared like a nice pat of butter Catholicism over it, right? Like a nice little shellac on top, right? So that way on the surface, yeah, there are saints and there's Mary and there's Jesus somewhere, but as soon as you look a little bit under the hood there, you see that it's a lot of traditional African religion, especially I believe like the Orisha of, I think, like mostly northern Western African traditions. And so, you know, you've got spirits like Oshun and Yemaya and all these other gods that are kind of hiding under the names of saints and other such things, so that these people who were being enslaved, can't stress this enough, being enslaved and you know, ripped away from their homelands and heavily oppressed, could still maintain something of their own culture and people. And this didn't like just happen like in African tribes, right? So when people look at this and they say, oh no, syncretic religion, that's so bad, it's like, well, I hate to break it to you, but this happens all over Europe too, right? So for instance, in Ireland, Saint Bridget of Kildare is so very obviously the goddess Bridget in a nun habit. Between her lore and between the place of her origin, Kildare there, it is so obviously the goddess Bridget of Celtic polytheism in a nun habit. This was done so that the Irish polytheists who over time converted to Christianity would not lose one of their most precious and sacred goddesses and symbols of their original indigenous traditions. This also happens in other places, right? Like even in Italy. Before Rome was Christian, they were following Roman polytheism. And so one of the really fun things is that a little bit of this polytheism has persisted into Italian folk Catholicism today. And in Italian folk magic, I was actually very surprised to see that there are some kind of prayers and spells to saints like Saint Jupiter, like Saint Minerva, you know, so on and so forth. They just took the gods of old Roman polytheism and made them into Christian saints. And same thing too in Slavic religion. In fact, Slavic Christianity, especially like that Eastern Orthodoxy and stuff, they are famous for the dual faith. The dual faith meaning, again, exactly as Santeria has done, basically Christian in the front, pagan in the back, right? So it's dual faith. It looks, for all intents and purposes, outside the church very Christian. You go in, and there's still references to old Slavic gods and all these other things. It's heavily syncretized. And saints have been syncretized as well, right? So, for instance, Veles, the Slavic god of the underworld, of music, of mischief, and magic, got syncretized with Saint Nicholas. Somehow. But these saints kind of not only took over a bit of the roles of these gods, as we can see when we look at Saint John the Baptist and Debunking or Kresnik, which are Slavic sun gods. So now Saint John's Day on the summer solstice has superseded Kresnik's and Debung's Day. But also we can see that these saints are also kind of code words for other gods that people are trying to talk about. Because believe it or not, Christianity is not native to any region outside the Levant, basically, because it started in the Levant, right? In Galilee, Bethlehem, like all these places. It started over there. It has nothing to do with Europe, with the Americas, with Africa, with any of that, except maybe Ethiopia, who has one of the oldest Bibles, but not really anywhere else. And so to maintain that sense of culture and to maintain that sense of, indigenous tradition in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and so on, there's going to be a heavy layer of syncretism. And so that's what we're also finding in these Caribbean ATRs, right, in these syncretic religions. That's what also we're finding in the Americas, right? We're finding that in hoodoo, for instance, which combines a lot of that kind of tradition, diasporic, African religion with Christianity, with indigenous beliefs, all kind of in one spot. So they're very specific to enslaved cultures, enslaved peoples, as well as the indigenous folks that got kind of caught up in the mix. And they are very, very important to the people who practice them. And I could go on with more and more examples of how syncretism in religion has worked and all of the evidence of it, and how people have, by hook or by crook, kept their indigenous traditions alive in Christianity. But you see my point. You see that this is not a new thing. This has been around for a long time, this way of doing religion, and that it's coexisted for literally centuries. And so when we talk about Santeria, when we talk about Palo Mayombe and Espiritismo, we really shouldn't be surprised that this is a practice that has persisted, right? Because these religions are the direct result of, people trying to persevere and survive such intense imperialism, colonization, oppression, enslavement, and so on. They are religions that signify the people's incredible resilience and defiance of the evil that has been put on them in the name of God. And in that, it is very important for me to point out that they are closed practices. They are closed to outsiders for the sake of protecting their faith, their traditions, and the people that practice them. They are not religions that are like Christianity, trying to go out and grab people in the name of God or in any of the spirits that they work with. They are very much doing their thing. They will help people, right? They'll do certain, maybe tarot readings or other types of divination, or even, spell work for people that are willing to pay for it and ask, and whatever. They're willing to help their communities in some way, and most places will know that someone is into that and that they are, capable of doing some kind of spell work like that. But it's not something that anyone can just decide to join or decide to be. You have to be initiated, you have to be taught, you have to be trained, and you have to be careful, secret with it, so that you do not bring people into harm's way. So knowing that, again, as I was saying, Santeria is a very much like an umbrella term, and there are many different paths that follow under it, one of them being Espiritismo, which is, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, just really this belief that spirits can be contacted, like people can still get to their ancestors after their ancestors have died. This really shouldn't be a surprise, because this is a part of Catholicism as well, right? If we think about the veneration of the saints and the praying to saints for intercession, that's like baked into Catholicism already. So that's shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, I feel like. But then another one is Palo Mayombe, which is kind of takes it a step further, I guess, takes it a little bit into a different direction, and certainly can have some more baneful elements to it, I'm not gonna lie. Even other practitioners of different variations of Santeria find Palo Mayombe a little bit controversial at times. And the reason there are so many discrepancies is because Santeria doesn't have an official written down canon like the institution of the Catholic Church, right? Like, there's no one book that says this is how it is. It really depends on oral traditions from different communities. So every community who has, any of these kinds of practitioners, they're going to have a different way of doing things, different traditions, different spirits. Like, there's going to be different things going on, right? Like, there can be animal sacrifice, right, for like prosperity and stuff, because that's a pretty old school part of many different religions. Even in the Hebrew Bible, we have talks of, right, the burnt offerings, killing 2 doves for a ritual in Leviticus 14. We've got, putting out the bread, tithing spices. Like, the concept of animal sacrifice and offerings is not new. It's not something that's constrained to one religion. I mean, hell, frickin' Abraham's covenant with God started by him splitting a goat in half and walking through 2 halves. So, like, when we see stuff like that people want to sensationalize and make out to be demonic, we have to remember that animal sacrifice and other, like, old traditions like this have been around in every religion for centuries. But not all paths even do that. Not all paths even do the whole, like, animal sacrifice thing. Some are just kind of doing some divination. Some are just asking spirits for help like a Catholic would any normal saint. Some are, again, like in Palo Mayombe, doing things a little more controversial, potentially even, doing workings to delete obstacles, be they abstract things or be they people. That's a thing, right? Death curses and death hexes do exist in multiple different religions, but it's not an inherent part of it, right? It's not something every single person does. Now, specifically though with Palo Mayombe, Palo means stick in Spanish, and Mayombe is actually Congolese for mysteries of the spirit, right? So Palo Mayombe kind of takes the idea of Espiritismo, of working with the dead, to a new level, in that they actually do have a place for human remains in their practice. So oftentimes, someone who's working in Palo Mayombe, they will have bits of human remains that generally they do get from, like, ethical sourcing. Like, there's a lot of fear-mongering about this kind of stuff. There's a lot of suspicion and nonsense, but what it really is that you can get human remains from, like, ethical sources. It is possible, and these people, they believe that the bone has kind of like an anchor to the soul of the person that once was using that bone, right? And so they can take that bone and better get a connection and contact with the spirit of the person that has passed on, and then they can ask that spirit for help. They can, do workings through that spirit, so on and so forth. So it's kind of like literally as if that bone were like a phone line, and you could just kind of call them up a little bit easier. So oftentimes in Palo Mayombe there will be a bone or so around, which, okay, it's like I have a bottle of my own baby teeth. If someone had one of my teeth, I guess after I had passed on, they could use that tooth to kind of better, like, knock knock wherever I am in the astral and find me, right? So that's that. Different religions, different beliefs. As you could see, it's clearly something that has to do with old school African traditional religion under a Catholic wrapping. And while, again, right, so people might say, oh my god, but that sounds so spooky, so scary. Let me stop you right there. Because again, old school religion. And on top of that, as I'm reading about Palo Mayombe, I actually find that it's quite a nature-centered path. It's very much like a rooted, grounded path, and one that has a very optimistic idea of death. One that has this view that says, well, okay, well, maybe this body is gone and you're no longer using it, but you are still alive and you still exist, just in a different form and in a different plane, and we can still contact each other and we can still get in touch. It's just going to look a little different than 2 living people talking to each other. So it's really actually a very interconnected, like, interesting path, and it has a lot of beauty to it if you are willing to look at it objectively and be respectful to people of other religions. And of course, like with any path, there are going to be people who get into things like this. There are going to be people who get into this kind of path for undue power. But that happens anywhere, right? Like, there's any religion you can think of, there are going to be people who want to get into it for some kind of power, be it social power, be it magical power, be it anything like that. I mean, there are plenty of demonolators of old school occultism who jump in thinking that they're going to be some super incredible Lord of Darkness, right? Like, that, as much as I want to say they don't exist, they do. And there are also plenty of Christians, right? Who see a group of gullible people who are willing to believe anything and who see right pickings. There are absolutely so many Christians out there willing to use the name of God like a flytrap to wrest social power and control, and especially things like money, out of folks looking for spiritual guidance. So as you might imagine, it's the tree and the root of the person in the religion that determines the fruit. You can always, as the Bible itself says, tell a tree by its fruits. Bad fruit, bad tree. So now that we've had that discussion, now we can kind of see a little bit of the background of these religions, right? And that they are clearly religions that people should not be speaking about out of turn, because they are the religions and the spiritualities of the oppressed and downtrodden, of people who were stolen from their homes and forced to take up religions and languages and customs that were not theirs. And they are signs of extremely stalwart, resilient, determined people who, even centuries later, were still able to, at least in some way, deny the machinations of the Spanish and the Portuguese who dragged them over to Cuba, Dominican Republic, Brazil, and everywhere else. They're religions that are heavily stigmatized, so easily misunderstood, often purposely so, and they've managed to maintain and preserve so many beautiful things, right? I mean, like, even in the less Santeria parts and the more just, like, mainstream parts, right, we can see where a lot of indigenous traditions have survived in Latin American Catholicism, right? If we have, like, La Virgen de Guadalupe is one of the greatest and most obvious signs. She is in the image of Mary, and yet she's clearly syncretized with other indigenous forces, other indigenous goddesses. Same thing with Santa Muerte, right? Santa Muerte being literally Saint Death in Spanish. And this is just the primordial force of death, angel of death, whatever you want to think about it, but has so much clearly indigenous lore embedded into her, while also being syncretized as a force that has always worked with God. And more than that, you can see it just in festivals like Dia de los Muertos, right? Like the Day of the Dead on November 5th or so. This is where the ancestors are coming back, and you have the ofrendas, and you have all of the foods and everything that they like to eat. You spend time with them. It's a heavily Latin American version of what the Catholics brought over, and also of indigenous traditions, right? Because the Catholics had their own idea of, like, honoring the ancestors, lighting candles for them, so on All Hallows Eve and All Saints Day and All Souls Day. So even if, these indigenous spirits and traditions kind of have, like, flowers and a blue robe and a rosary thrown on them, they're still very obviously special and sacred to people of these areas in ways that the Catholic Church, even still, has been trying to stamp out and get rid of, but they never will. They just never will. And so there are a lot of people who, of course, will cry heresy at the idea of the Catholic Church and Catholicism being mixed with other religions like this. Time and time again, people, I've seen them cry and whine about syncretism and, oh, this is heresy, this is pagan, this is this, and that. But to which I say, what did you expect, Rome? What did you expect when you basically decided that the name of Jesus gave you permission to come and steamroll other cultures violently, forcibly? What did you think was going to happen? If the Vatican and all these colonial powers of Europe did not make it a necessity for these indigenous peoples across Africa, Europe, the Americas, and so on to paint over their own traditions with Catholicism to avoid getting burned, killed, displaced, so on, then it wouldn't have happened. This kind of syncretism would not have been so intense and to such a degree that we are now seeing it. It still would have happened to some extent, right, as people kind of brush up against each other and live next to each other, but it wouldn't have been this extreme because people would not have felt pressured to put a rosary on top of pagan iconography. Hello. If Rome didn't want that to happen, Rome should have kept its grubby hands to itself and not done horrible tragedies and travesties against humanity in the name of God. As the old saying goes, you reap what you sow. Santeria, Palo Mayombe, Espiritismo, these are things that are very sacred and should not be messed with and should not be stigmatized and should not be looked at with such awful attitudes as people tend to have when they don't understand history or, culture or religion or anything else. That's all I'm really going to say about that, because it's really frustrating, and we're going to see some more frustrating things later as we go through this book. But before we get into all that, let us also, now that we've covered these religions, let's talk about the man himself, John Ramirez. So John Ramirez is a Puerto Rican who came to America as a child, according to his book and also his website. And he allegedly was in a lot of ooky spooky things as he was, coming into early adulthood and so on. He got into all kinds of, as he describes it, satanic cults and all this kind of other stuff, right? And so he was in the middle of 1,000,002 of these ooky spooky paths, which he kind of just lumps into one thing in this book, which again we'll get into, but he just kind of calls it the religion, TM, despite him describing multiple different branches of Santeria, but I digress. With all that, he paints himself as this ex-satanic high priest turned Christian, and Jesus has won him back to the light, and now he can save you too, if you just, buy his books and donate money. Like our first girl Jenny, he's got his own really cool flashy website, and he's got his own ministry called John Ramirez Ministries, and it shows him doing all kinds of talks in public and going out and doing all these speeches, writing all these books, all these fun things. And again, as I said, right on the very front page, it's not like I'm just putting words in his mouth. It's not like I'm saying that he says that all this stuff is satanic. He himself, on his website, describes himself as an ex-Satanist, now evangelist. Let me say that again for people who haven't really grasped the problem here. An ex-Satanist. Where, in all of our descriptions, right, of Santeria, Palo Mayombe, of Espiritismo, did I ever mention Satan? Do you remember where I mentioned Satan? I don't remember. In all of my leafing through, of course, I'm willing to bet Satan and the devil and such appear somewhere. And in fact, there is a little folk devil in Santeria, but not the Christian devil, kind of just a little goofy little spirit dude. You know what I mean? Satanism is not a part of Santeria or any of its associated paths and branches the way this guy is painting it. So hold on to that fact, hold on to that tidbit, because seriously, look at this. Look at this guy's website, right? In his powerful testimony, author and evangelist John Ramirez tells his true life story of how he was trained to be a satanic cult, Santeria, spiritualism, and Palo Mayombe high-ranking warlock. A warlock? How powerful could he be with only 4 spell slots? I mean, from what I've read in these religions, there is a lot of use of rum. There's a lot of use of spitting rum. So I mean, he could definitely get me with a good 1d12 of poison spray damage, but consider fireball. But no, yeah. So if we scroll around Fam's page over here, this is a powerful and incredible testimony that shows how God displays His majesty in every generation by going beyond the human mind, and how the world thinks and how the world perceives things. God is beyond that. He loves the misfit. I mean, that's not incorrect, but I don't think that the misfit is what you think it is, but he is, oh geez, here we go. His life is like the Apostle Paul, but also he compares himself to the donkey that was tied up in the New Testament. The donkey that Jesus Christ knew his condition, his situation, and his location. That was John Ramirez's story. He was bound 25 years, incarcerated spiritually by the devil. Yet God knew his condition and his location. The Holy Spirit went after him and brought him to the foot of the cross. Today, because of the grace of God, he is an evangelist for Jesus Christ for spiritual warfare and setting the captives free. God, I need like an evangelist bingo card, okay? Because there's always like spiritual warfare, devil, fucking Apostle Paul's a new one. But this entire website is built around this book's like main premise. This is his first book that we're looking at, and the ones that come after are. Never mind. If we go to his author tab, we can see these goofy little books. So his latest one seems to be Fire Prayers. Building arsenals that destroy satanic kingdoms. I can't take this in. Filled with powerful teachings, Fire Prayers will equip you with a spiritual warfare arsenal that will leave Satan and his kingdom trembling and unable to manipulate, control, or dominate you. Hinder your relationship with Jesus or thwart your destiny. Oh baby, that's some language that you're using in that description there, bud. That sure is some language. Okay. We've also got combat prayers to crush the enemy, which is such a funny little combat prayers. With passion and insight gained from years on the front lines of spiritual warfare, John Ramirez equips you with the biblical weapons and practical strategies you need to battle the enemy successfully. Get them tactical psalms in there, brother. Oh my god, just lob those little Gideon Bibles like grenades whenever something comes by. This is so Jesus and John Wayne coded. This is so heavier on the John Wayne side of it, but yeah. And then Conquer Your Deliverance, which is, those sure are words. Conquer Your Deliverance. I cannot wrap my mind around that one, actually, because Conquer Your Deliverance, what does conquest have to do with God pulling you? Never mind. Whatever. We can't get into that right now. That's a whole separate thing. But focusing on key strategies from Scripture. Ex-satanic high priest John Ramirez. Here we go again. But okay. Teaches you how to shore up your defenses in Christ after winning a battle and how to put your life back in order. Ramirez uses his own experiences to reveal principles for growing in your faith and in Holy Spirit power.
Holy Spirit, activate.
Again, right? We have so much talk of battle here. Battle, conquest, tactical defenses, whatever the arsenals, army stuff. Such heavy, masculinized, militarized army language. And that's why I say it's so Jesus and John Wayne coded, because Jesus, the point of his story is that he got killed by an imperialist force, by the Roman Empire. He gave himself up. He surrendered. He was not out there doing what Peter and Judas wanted him to do, which is start hacking and slashing and fighting and all that. That was not it. There was none of this conquest, battle, whatever. So, it's such a genre convention. That needs to go on the freaking evangelical bingo card. Is just any kind of militarized language. Tactical is conquer that, blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. Spiritual warfare and all the books and tools and sermons and classes and workshops and seminars and stuff that you can pay money for, to defeat the devil. This is such a trope in evangelical Christianity that it's like almost embarrassing. You know what I mean? But no, as I was saying, right? You gotta have them tactical psalms on hand when those spooky water spirits pop up and just start giving you grief for no reason, right? Also, what the hell is it with these people and water spirits? Jenny's got a book like that too about water spirits. There's more than one element out there, but for some reason these guys are always picking on water spirits. But anyway, maybe if we look at this guy's website long enough, maybe we will find some edumacation that will make me feel a little bit better about this book I'm about to dive into, despite the fact that we are already hyper-sensationalizing this as ex-satanic high priest warlock turned Christian in a religious system that does not have warlocks or satanic priests. Alright, there we go. So we got a Doctorate of Divinity from the Life Christian University, and also a bachelor's degree in ordination papers. Doctorate, bachelor's. I mean, it is possible to get a bachelor's and then jump right into your PhD, but there's not much of a reason to mention the bachelor's anymore, John, just in case you wanted some constructive criticism there. All of this is from one school, though, which, after I investigated a little bit about, I found to be a school that's been around since 1995 and is accredited by the Accrediting Commission International. It says, LCU has chosen not to seek governmental school accreditation, as in, like, legitimate accreditation. No. LCU has chosen not to seek governmental school accreditation because we believe we should not allow secular institutions to dictate the qualifications for instructors or the programs for a spirit-filled ministerial degree. I guess, like, my state's Catholic colleges just need to eat ass. Crazy, right? So in my state, we've got Salve Regina University, which is a really, really well-known Catholic school in Newport, and it says they are fully accredited by the New England Commission of Higher Education. That's a secular institution. So there's no reason why you couldn't have gotten accredited by, like, actual standardized commission boards, LCU, unless maybe never mind. You know what? Never mind. Let's just move on. Let's just keep going. All right. So okay, cool. You got accredited through a third party thing that seems to have some affiliation with Christianity, specifically for your spirit-filled ministerial degree. Okay. The only problem with that, though, is that the Accrediting Commission International seems to almost exclusively be trying to help schools that are not really that great and are not good enough for government recognition in the first place to properly recognize. You know? So, go figure that this Accrediting Commission International is pretty much by and for Bible colleges with absolutely no substance. But I mean, okay, come on. Listen, that's not me being harsh. You know there's a problem when you, as the accrediting institution, have to tell the colleges you accredit to follow basic non-discrimination laws. Jesus Christ. Anyway, so the point of that adventure is the fact that, nope, looked into him, and it looks like that education is worth as much as a degree you'd find at the bottom of a cereal box, and that's not great. I can, however, combine all of these factors together into a little folder of things to keep in mind, right? When I think about this man's credibility. Because if we remember in our last video about Jenny, we talked about logos, ethos, and pathos. Ethos is credibility, right? And right now, the ethos is a little dubious. And when I think about all these things in tandem, it makes this a great opportunity to tell you about another really great academic tool for research. So again, right, I am a professor who teaches intro to research writing, who teaches things like logos, ethos, and pathos for making solid arguments, who also teaches things like the CRAP test for evaluating sources. And this book really exemplifies why the CRAP test is so important. Remember that I found this book from a girlie saying, hey, I read books too. This is a book. This is many words sandwiched between two covers. Therefore, it's valid. Remember that? Yeah. Girlie did not use her CRAP test, and I'm going to drag you through a little bit of why. Right? So, the CRAP test stands for the 5 things you got to look at when evaluating a source for your research. And that is currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. The point of this test is to help students figure out whether or not a source is worth their time in whatever it is they're trying to write a paper about before they get, like, 200 pages deep into an entire book about it, right? If you can kind of analyze a source right from the beginning with this, you can save yourself a lot of time, because as we all know, students don't have that much time. They can't just be pouring through 40, 50, 60 page, scientific journals, or, just digging through database after database and collecting every single thing they find when they just need to stick to like 5 sources. 5 sources of 10 to 15 pages is already a lot of reading, right? And if you want to be more efficient, you gotta know how to cut the fluff and really keep only the creme de la creme for your argument. Because it would be really awful, right, if we were trying to do research on something like witchcraft, and where we might be expecting something really academic and well researched and well explained, We instead got a very highly exaggerated non-fiction story about a person's personal experience with certain forms of spiritualism that don't really necessarily have to do with witchcraft in the first place, right? So anyway, the first couple parts of the crap test are pretty self-explanatory, right? We've got currency and we've got relevance. Usually when students are researching something like, say, medicine, well, currency matters a lot because if you're looking at a source from 1902, medicine has progressed a lot since then, and you can't really make any effective arguments about modern medicine based off of articles and studies from 1902. Likewise, relevance is like, okay, say you're specifically studying, I don't know, fungal infections in people's nails. Well, if you're studying fungus, then any papers about viruses, right, and, you know, stuff like that probably aren't going to be helpful for you to learn about the fungus that causes nail problems. So, for this case, right, John's book was written in, or at least was published in 2010. And so that's about 14 years ago now, which isn't like crazy outdated. I would prefer to see something within the past 3 to 5 years on this subject, but okay, it's not the worst, right? Like, it's still within this century, so that's fine. And the subject matter is relevant-ish, right, in that this is something that impacted someone who was a witch. This has to do something with spirits, magic, syncretic religion, something, right? Many Christian witches do work in syncretic religion, especially like Catholic or Irish or some other folk magic tradition. Okay, sure, I mean, it's kind of dipping more into a very specific area of syncretized tradition that not many general population members are going to be looking into generally, but we can expand our scope a little bit and say, you know what, sure, pop that in here too. It has something to do with witchcraft in some degree, maybe. But authority and accuracy, unfortunately, are where John really eats it in this book. His own authority as a writer is built on rotting wooden stilts at this point, now that we know his background and his education profile, and now that we've picked out some pretty common tropes in his general public presentation. And the book itself, as anything authoritative, is shredded immediately on impact, thanks to his absolute lack of any real citations or academic research in this book. And while, like, okay, so after the full story that he tells in this book, right, there's a couple chapters at the very end that actually describe, like, Santeria, Palo Mayombe, and all these things in a more, like, straightforward definition, and that just give a slew of Bible verses about witchcraft as well that, like, literally have no explanation, they're just plopped there. But while he does give definitions for these things and explain a little bit about where Santeria and these other things came from, he does it in a way that is as easy to disprove as a quick Google search, and is also extremely, extremely biased, which immediately shoots the accuracy of his statements in the face, and also dents his credibility, his authority, quite a bit. We'll get more into this, but the way he portrays these three things, Santeria, Palo Mayombe, Espiritismo, is not only extremely inaccurate, it's downright disingenuous, and dare I say, extremely racist. Again, more on that in a bit, because that part has to do with the P in crap, which is purpose. So hold on to this discussion question as we go along. What do we think John's purpose is in writing a book like the one we're about to get into? What is his reason for doing this? And if you have kind of a bit of a hard time, abstract time, formulating that answer right now, think about who his audience in this book might be. Think about that demographically, right? Think about who is this audience in terms of race, location, age, general beliefs. Think about the psychographics, well, you know, the psychographics of, like, religions, politics, and anything else like that. Who is John's audience? And once you have that answer, ask yourself again, what is his purpose in writing this book? But alright, I've told you a bit about what's going on here with John. Let's now get into the meat and potatoes of this book and see if we think that this is at all credible, legit, or worth my time as a Jesus-loving witch myself, who's just trying to consider my naysayer's point of view. And right away, here is the thing that makes me tired about this book before we even get into anything at all, and that's that this is not an academic book in any way. At least Jenny was trying, in a way, to, like, get into some philosophical things, right? Do some thought experiments, explain some stuff at all, kind of give some definitions and some, tips and some examples. This book is literally just a large non-fiction, and it starts from the beginning with John's childhood, and then goes into his giant conversion experience to Christianity later on. So it's like his entire life story, right? So it describes, what it was like to grow up in the Bronx of New York as Puerto Rican immigrants. It describes, him growing up with just a terrible father in a terrible environment, all while his poor mother really tried to do her best to give him and his brothers what good of a childhood she could as a stay-at-home mother, completely dependent on this terrible father. And in the beginning, there are a lot of things that tug at your heartstrings, right? A lot of things that make you feel like really bad for John and say, oh my god, that's really actually terrible, and I'm sorry for you, John. Which, remember, pathos, right? Emotional appeals, not logical or credibility appeals. And they build a very specific frame for him to paint the rest of his spiritual misadventures onto, right? And there are a lot of things in this book that, like, honestly are really worthy to talk about. There are a lot of things that come up in this book that had me like, wow, there's a lot that Ramirez, like, could have said about so many of these different topics. But the thing is, they're difficult things to talk about, right? Like, he spends a lot of time describing his feelings about his dad, like the resentment and the frustration and the walking on eggshells. A lot of time talking about, like, the broken home, the shame he would feel around his peers who had more stable families, the difficulties of growing up in, like, these kind of inner city places that aren't properly funded, aren't properly cared for in the same way that the better neighborhoods are, right? And there's, like, those domestic things to talk about too, right? The fact that he describes his father as out drinking and having mistresses while his mother's at home crying and trying to make the grocery budget work on, like, $5 a week in, like, 1980 something. Like, there's so much here that really is worthy of discussion and worthy of breaking down and looking at. It's a rough testimony of Ramirez's early life, and it really didn't let up. Like, in the entire first 3 chapters, it was really just bang, 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 like, here's this horrible situation. And if this is really his early life, like, if this really is the truth, then yeah, this is an objectively terrible way for any child to grow up. This is awful. No one should experience a home like this, a community like this, or anything else that he is describing. Granted that any of this book is real and actually happened. And there's a big reason I say granted that this book is real and any of this happened, trust me. The best I can really say with the early life stuff is that the way to make a lie convincing is to mix it with some truth. So, I mean, I honestly will err on the side of Ramirez here, and I'll say that, yeah, there is probably some stuff in his early life that was really awful and really difficult for him to go through. Whether or not the rest is real, again, well, you can decide that as we go along. But remember our discussion question now, right? Because it's the only one that we really need today, which is, what is John's purpose with this book? Not the purpose he says, right, of showing people back to Jesus and ministering in the name of God, like that. No, not the purpose he says. The purpose behind his actual descriptions. The purpose behind the way this book is structured, the things it uses to make his point, so on and so forth. What is his actual purpose underneath his purpose? What is the purpose of showing that his awful, horrible, terrible father had saints of Santeria in his room? Or depicting the gods of another religion, predictably, as demons? Of the insistence that there were no good boys in the hood? Or that he had an Indian chief named Tawata as a guardian spirit? What is his purpose for describing himself as having wicked energy all over him? And really sensationalizing the sacrificing of, like, say, a rooster, which is completely normal in so many religions. And that's why I said, right, if you're having a hard time answering that purpose under the purpose question, that hidden motive, go back to the demographics. Who is this book written for? All of these terms, spiritual warper, satanic, warlock, this and that. Who is the intended recipient of the contents of this book? And what do you think that audience knows about Santeria, Espiritismo, or Palo Mayombe before getting into this book? And why does that make all of this so much worse? And because the answer to that question brings us right into our next section, which is the insane amounts of racism in this book. Because I'll tell you what, as I said before, there are a lot of worthy things that John could have talked about in this book. And note that I say could have. He mentions, right, somewhere in the book that when he moved at one point to a nicer part of New York, to a nicer neighborhood, that there was a group of white boys who... Oh my god. So yeah, he mentions that he moves to a nicer neighborhood for a while, and the white boys on the block are predictably, like, kind of racist, right? And by kinda, I mean very. And so they are being racist to him, and John points it out. John says, yep, this was racism. Like, he says the R word and everything. This was bad. This was not good, right? Okay, sure. These are things, these are realities of the world that we should absolutely be talking about. Yet how strange it is that he can call out the racism done to him as a Puerto Rican immigrant, you know, as someone who comes from a like milquetoast American culture, but when it comes to literally anyone else, suddenly racism is on the menu, like completely and utterly. And how strange it is also that he really can't seem to grasp the consequences of literally demonizing decentralized spiritual paths born out of a response to oppression, colonialism, and enslavement. Spiritual paths that are predominantly practiced by people of color. So now that I've told you a bit about Santeria and how it is a syncretic path and how it is a sign and testament of people's resolve and dedication to their ancestors, to their traditions, to their truth, let's look at how John describes Santeria in the back of the book, okay? He says, African slaves used other Roman Catholic saints to cover up this evil practice. Through this dark practice of worship, slaves kept the religion alive by the trickeries of Satan. Now, centuries later, this same voodoo practice has changed its appearance once more, adapting itself to this generation and culture and the lifestyles that people live today. Baby, voodoo is... God, we gotta add another one to this list now? Santeria, Espiritismo, Palo Mayombe, and also now voodoo. Just keep adding them, John. Keep going. But then later he also says, the devil and his demons adopt names in Santeria like Obatala, Yamaya, Oshun, and Elegua to identify themselves with the people they want to entrap. Dude, those are not the names of demons. Those are the names of traditional African spirits. Traditional African gods, even. Because if I've learned anything about, I believe this is of, like, Nigerian spirituality specifically, but these are the names of the Orisha, which kind of function sort of like angels in a way. I believe there's something in this spirituality where there is like a supreme god that kind of leaves the world's stewardship in the hands of these Orisha, who very much remind me of Yazidism in a way, right? Where it's that same kind of thing, where in Yazidism there's God, and they have like the whole thing, like Adam and Eve and all this other kind of stuff. There's this God who leaves the stewardship of the world in the hands of 7 angels, like, you know, Michael and Melek Taus and all these other ones. So it's just another cosmology that has a supreme god and then other specialized gods, like Yamaya being goddess of the sea, I believe, into this kind of focused worship, personification of natural forces that people needed in order to make sense of the world around them, right? Like, of course, if you need the ocean to live, you're going to have a god or goddess of the ocean. We have Poseidon, we have Yamaya, we have, like, Helena, we have so many gods of the sea and of trade and of waters and of sailing. It's like, hello, obviously. They're not demons. And specifically, these Orisha are spirits that Christian colonization has tried to erase, oppress, just destroy, and that's why they are existing in these syncretic faiths, because their people have tried to hold on to them, just like the Irish held on to St. Bridget, just like the Slavs held on to all of their gods. Come on. And that's not even going over the anti-Catholic propaganda in this book, with its complete misunderstanding of idols. It's just focus on the Bible only, and on, like, Jesus at the complete ignorance of everything else going on in an established 2,000-year-old religion, but that's like its own whole separate thing that we just don't have time for because we're too busy talking about this glaringly heinous problem in this book. Because the dude is punching holes in the authority part of the crap test when he says stuff like this, when we know through our own research that this is not what Santeria is, that Santeria has nothing to do with Satan trying to make this evil religion worm its way into Christianity. Like, come on. That's propaganda, dude. That's propaganda. That's not real. So obviously revealing his bias when he does that, and it ruins his authority, it ruins his credibility. It also completely blows accuracy out of the water, because as you can see, none of our research reflects that. None, right? But for Ramirez's purposes, he doesn't need to be accurate or impartial, like when describing this. And that's because of who he chose as his audience. So if you were thinking about that question, what is his purpose and who is his audience, here's where I'm going to give a little bit of my 2 cents. And like you've probably already guessed, I'm guessing that this book, with its talk of witchcraft assignments and the hood of New York, and where he's describing this religion he was sucked into as one where words were chanted in African, TM, and Spanish.
Bruh.
Not a specific African language, not Wolof, not Igbo, not anything, just African TM. This is a book geared towards white Protestant Americans. WASPs, if you will. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. It's geared towards WASPs whose closest brushes with other cultures come from going around the Epcot Center at Disneyland. I guarantee it. You can also tell that these are the kind of people that John is trying to hook when he says extremely goofy stuff like these little snippets that I pulled out of certain parts of the book. All of these pieces come from chapter 6, which is titled A Night of Voodoo, which again is a separate, specifically more Haitian variant of these ATRs, but I digress. He says things like, "For me, autumn meant one thing, the approach of Halloween, my favorite holiday. Halloween is the most mysterious, carnal, and devilish holiday of them all. That weekend, on Halloween night, I catered to the demons at my home, set up all my witchcraft spells against those I hated, and then got dressed up and went to meet my 2 friends at the neighborhood club in Parkchester. Walking on my way home into the night, I felt mystical, excited, and I was already planning my next move."
Show me a move.
And then this one is from like way later when he meets this this Christian girl who is really just a plot device to get him to no longer be an ooky spooky Satanist warlock super devil man 5000. But he says, "If people could see the evil that's veiled from their eyes, what tarot reading does to a person, and the danger parents put upon their children by getting them involved in Halloween, they would shriek in horror." Girl, be so for real and leave my cute little herb tarot and my little tiny ghost tea light holders alone, okay? Like, I know these things might, if I hold them up, they might spook John a bit, but I don't think these things are going to, or actually have, or ever will, bring unfathomable evil. And furthermore, the answer to this question is probably no, but like, does this guy even understand the Catholic origins of All Hallows Eve? Does he understand the Christian reasons for this holiday? Does he understand that Dia de los Muertos is still a largely considered Catholic festival, even with all of its syncretic elements? Probably not, right? Probably not. Probably has no idea what the purpose of any of these things are, or where they come from, or why. And it's insidious to me, extremely so, that this guy would go out of his way to bastardize, stereotype, stigmatize, demonize, predominantly, like, religions of people of color. And to do so for the sake of what I see as making his bread and butter off of the pearl-clutching white people that this book is geared for. And you know also that he is specifically doing this to the Jims and Bobs and Beckys and Barbas of heavily evangelical areas, heavily conservative areas, heavily Bible Belt areas, and this is probably also explains the way he paints inner city areas like the Bronx. But not only is that just like insidious and awful and it just really disgusting, but it's also downright irresponsible and dangerous because we know the kinds of groups that have sprouted up in Bible Belt type areas, right? Like we know those kinds. And we know that these areas and this demographic really are some satanic panic junkies. And they love to feel scared and threatened and like the goodness of their society is under attack. And the problem is, when these kinds of people start feeling that way, they do some really bad stuff. And so my problem with this book, and the reason I'm being so serious for the past several minutes in this overview of it, is because this is not a laughing matter. Like this, to me, genuinely, I was looking at this and saying, wow, this book is a breeding ground for stereotypes that lead to suspicion and profiling and vigilante dangerous activities by fearful, uneducated people. This is something that puts real people in harm's way and actively hinders the freedoms afforded to us in the First Amendment, freedom of religion, and just generally freedom to not be harassed, assaulted, and so on for our beliefs. This is not good. This is awful, right off the bat. And so, that racism then ties into one of the greatest problems in the book after it, which is John's story here, which is literally loaded with stereotypes of Satanism. Loving all the vices of the world, like, good drink and spicy times and whatnot, not caring about other people, gloating about one's personal power, walking around like an extremely cringy anime protagonist. Like in the book, Ramirez describes himself as a spiritual hitman, right? And all of these other goofy things that really don't have anything to do with like Santeria as a broad subject at all. And again, the stereotypes don't stop with like Satanism, and they don't stop with the bastardization of ATRs. Like, the stereotypes abound. Remember our Indian chief spirit Tawada over here? Yeah, it gets mentioned a few times and then just kind of disappears. It's just like literally just a random plot element that is a catalyst moment for John, in that like somehow this Indian chief Tawada here magically spawns a necklace and drops it out of the sky for John to wear for a while and, keep around as his guardian spirit or something. A lot to unpack there. And just like all the other goofy, weird stuff he puts in there, it's all just so stereotypical. I mean, like look at this Indian chief Tawada's induction ceremony to the religion TM, as he describes it. Listen to this. Permission of the white table, Cookie called out one night, Cookie being like one of these elders or initiators or something, directing her dark eyes towards me. I see one of the most powerful guardian spirits in all Espiritismo guiding and protecting you, John. Her words hung in the air as I waited for what would come next. He is an Indian chief spirit named Tawada, she added, and at that moment I remembered the Indian necklace that had dropped out of the sky when I was younger. Amazed, after that I prayed to this special new deity, my protective spirit, daily, even moment by moment. It's just so no. Why? Why are you making caricatures? Stop. In Christian fiction, don't. It's just so icky, and that's why, like, again, I want to be light and jovial with these videos because obviously a lot of these Christian books are super goofy, but this one is just, like, bad, It's, But there's also, like, some witchcraft parties he attends, which... I literally, he mentions witchcraft parties so many times, but doesn't really get into the specifics of any of them but one. And in that one witchcraft party, it's apparently a birthday party for one of the spirits that this group of Santeria practitioners works with. And so, like, that would be, I guess, some of the thing, like, someone would be, like, a conduit for a spirit to kind of come and enjoy the physical world for a little while or something. And so this was a birthday party for a Gisler spirit. Yup. For an alleged Spanish Romani spirit that he claims in the book would possess one of the elders and then just make everyone dance, and then would go stare at herself in the mirror to remind herself how pretty she used to be when she was alive. I wish to God I was making this up. I wish. Because what the So there's a lot of talk of, like, you know, drinking and doing whatever there is at witch parties with the Romani stereotype spirit. And then there's another caricature called Mohammed the Muslim. Again, I wish I were making this up. But yeah, there's Mohammed the Muslim, who Ramirez can't really decide if Mohammed's name is spelt with an O or with a U, but I guess it doesn't really matter because he really only shows up for like 5 seconds so that Ramirez can flex about how cool his demon powers are over this Muslim guy. This guy's whole function in the narrative is part of a larger storyline where Ramirez describes himself as breaking the faith of those weaklings who believed in God. Oh, edgy, right? Like, just being super edgy, preying on these Christians at parties and stuff, and getting them to, like, think that he's some ooky spooky super powerful guy because he can correctly play 20 questions with them. Like, it's really stupid, but listen, that shitbag way he goes about, like, showing Mohammed the Muslim his insane demon power is by just airing out to women's dirty laundry and trauma in the middle of a diner. I shit you not. Like, listen, they thought it was a game, but instantly I turned serious. You recently broke up with your boyfriend, I told the first girl. You caught him cheating. This is the 3rd time in your life you've been stepped on by a man. Her face went blank, and she looked across the booth at her friend in wordless appeal. And you, I said, pointing to the other girl, you're nothing but a spare tire. You're worthless. You hand yourself out to any man. You can't even get your own man. You don't even remember the last time you had a real relationship because you're too busy taking other people's men. Bro. The second girl's face turned red and her eyes pooled with tears, but I didn't care. I turned back to Mohammed and gave him a raised eyebrow look. How do you know these things? The dark-haired girl asked. Her friend was still too dumbfounded to speak. I just laughed. I told you. I have powers. The girls tried to shake things off, not believing what had just happened, and they pointed in my direction. He's the one with the powers. He's the powerful. This is Cusco's poison. You poisoned me just for Cusco. Oh, then that last line, right? That day, Muhammad had to bow down to my God. His religion was worthless. Yeah. And I mean, like, obviously, right, he's painting himself as some grand villain, as some super hyper jerk, right? Because the point is that he was such a jerk because he was into satanic devil worship stuff, right? Like, again, he can talk about people being racist to him, and that's fine, right? And as he should talk about that. He should mention that racism is bad. But then it's very rules for thee, not for me, when he turns around and makes up these insane caricatures of Native Americans, of Romani people, of Muslims, of literally everyone. That's fine, apparently, for him to do that. And, like, immediately as I was reading this book, I was like, this is upsetting. And you cannot blame this on you being part of the religion, because your description of the religion is also racist, and also a caricature, and also a stereotype. And that, again, this is my biggest problem with the book. If John wanted to talk about his life, he could have. He could have talked about real issues, right? Like domestic violence, classism, financial abandonment of inner cities. He could have talked about institutional racism in broken homes. He could have talked about all of that. He could have talked about all these things independently and shared some of his insights on how, like, he thinks maybe as a society, as a collective, we can address these things, right? Like, could have talked to a Puerto Rican audience. He could have done a bunch of stuff to talk about serious, real issues. But that would mean actually tackling issues that are too big for any one person to overcome. And that's what I notice a lot about evangelical type stuff. Such toxic and just awful individualism that rather than actually taking on the broken system that affects everyone, one that is insidiously designed to keep entire groups of people down, he would instead rather just, make some extremely caricaturized version of a religion of predominantly people of color, and then also make it out to be some pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing where all of these bad problems aren't caused by, systemic racism, systemic violence. or anything else, but instead just on not following Jesus, right? To talk about any of these very valid and worthy things to talk about, in the end, would mean that Ramirez, instead of tokenizing himself and completely scapegoating all of these other people, places, religions, and things, he would instead have to actually do the big work. The work that does not necessarily gain you the same quick access to fame and glory and money as this kind of stuff does. But again, can you blame John? Because at the end of the day, real social work is hard, and grifting and lying like this is easy. But I do say lying too, right? And because, trust me, this whole book has more than enough little details and quirks and turns of phrases that make me extremely aware that all of this that he talks about, past maybe some of his childhood stuff, did not happen. Like, this is if Are That Happened was a book. Like, I'm not even joking. And when I see all these Goodreads reviews saying, wow, powerful testimony, crazy, wow, amazing, it makes me really understand why Jennifer LeClaire had to write an entire book about not being caught by grifters in a still very grifting way. So here's where we can kind of hop off the serious topics for now. I think I've made my point that this book is insanely problematic for many reasons. Now let's talk about all the ways in which none of the stuff John talks about actually happened. None of it. Not even a little. Let's talk about it. Now, despite this one specific Goodreads review where someone emphatically insisted that, no, this is all real because I knew John when he was just getting out of that life and it's super real and you can't say it's not, right? Like, despite this Goodreads review really, weirdly and not at all suspiciously trying to convince us that this is a real story, the truth is that there's anyone believing John's story out there, I have a bridge to sell them. In fact, I have three. I have 3 bridges to sell them. And it also really makes me wonder where that girl is that recommended this book to me. Are you okay, girlie? If you somehow got back to me and you're seeing this, are you okay? Are you good? Do you need, like, tutorship on the crap test and stuff? From my experience as a witch, as an occultist, as a magician, as a student of religion and philosophy, everything about this book just has me like, that did not happen. None of this happened. None of this happened. And all of that comes from how absolutely cringe, how absolutely chunibyo this entire book reads, right? We get a little glimpse of it with the Chief Tawada bit that I read to you before with the most powerful spirit, this Native American stereotype. But, like, it gets worse. It gets so much insanely, it's just so much worse. Watch. Here's one. He says things like, my sharpened spiritual senses picked up an evil vibe. In the same instant, the mediums at the white table shouted, focus! Focus! And then another one, you're going to be something great in this religion, one might say, a look of admiration in their eyes. We can't wait to see how far you're going to go in Santeria, another would echo. You're going to be very powerful. You will win many souls. May I remind you, these are closed practices that are very highly initiation-based only, largely often depending on ancestry, or at least with some deep connection to a culture. You can't just jump in. But nonetheless, this whole thing, the way they talk about it, spiritual senses, oh, my sharpened senses, you're going to be very powerful one day, Luke Skywalker. Like, it's giving Chosen One. It's giving Bethesda. It's giving Chunibyo. And if you've never heard that word Chunibyo before, then, well, let me explain. If you're an anime enjoyer of any kind, you probably have heard this term before, but if not, it literally means second grader syndrome, and it's a Japanese term that, a la Google, means this. It's a Japanese colloquial term typically used to describe early teens who have grandiose delusions, who desperately want to stand out, and who have convinced themselves that they have hidden knowledge or secret powers. Here's another example of this insane Chunibyo phenomena from Ramirez's book that I found. Are you ready? Because this is just, they're like just a chest full of little tidbits of chuny cringe in here. Oh my god, I just took psychic damage just glimpsing at it again. I was a hitman in the supernatural who could take out you and your family or anyone else I was hired to destroy. How can you stop something this evil and unseen when it is sent to attack you and destroy your life? That is the purpose of the Cauldron. The Cauldron of Palo Mayombe, and I was one of the best at using this demonic tool to accomplish hell on earth. I wish this was alcohol. I wish this was alcohol. Oh my god. So that cauldron that he mentions is actually another part of Palo Mayombe. So on top of, bones and stuff, they also usually have some kind of cauldron where they would, like, put offerings in or something like that. Like a small kind of a thing, like a vessel like that. And so that's what he's talking about here. But he insisted that he had 100-pound cast iron cauldron just chilling in his closet at his house, with like all kinds of satanic symbols just like painted on it, whatever the hell that means. And according to him, he had a cauldron with the devil's face like engraved on it, and that was his meeting spot for the devil and all of these demons to just induce powers beyond human comprehension and evil that can be felt and touched. But by this point of the book, I wanted to lovingly embrace a toaster in the nearest body of water, because it just kept stacking. Cringe on cringe on cringe on dumb on stupid on nonsense, okay? And I say that as a witch who plays with real demons. Like baby. I've seen hell. I've talked to demons like from the medieval occultist grimoires, okay? Those ones that are always popping up in Hollywood movies with the fun sigils that everyone gets spooked to see. I've spoken to those demons, and even they don't do whatever tomfoolery that you're describing here. Also, yeah, when this guy walks around, like, saying all of this stuff, and also, like, saying goofy stuff to other people in the book, in the narrative, yeah, this is LARPing. This is live-action roleplay LARP chuny nonsense. Like, this is fiction. Chop the non right off there, baby. It is fiction. I've seen many characters in, like, anime, right? Like, the chuny-coded characters doing this stuff satirically. It's fun when it's satire. It's hilarious when you see the characters from, like, Psyche K being all, like, Judgment Nights of kind of nonsense, right? Like, that's funny. It's not funny when a grown-ass man is pretending to do it so he can make a quick buck off of people's, like, racist stereotypes of other religions. But, you know, like, it doesn't hit the same way. Sorry. But then again, like, I mean, at the same time, what can we reasonably expect from people who, again, needed a grifter to tell them not to get grifted in their own religion? With terms like prophetic witchcraft. Jenny. Moreover, another thing is the way this guy describes his dealings with the devil. So there's a part, right, where, I guess, like, his brother almost gets, unalived out there in the Bronx, TM. And so, you know, this guy, Ramirez here, he goes and petitions these spirits to, you know, take vengeance on these guys that almost injured his brother, and then later also to put his brother in jail, because I guess jail will somehow protect him from the streets where, you know, lots of bad Bronx TM things happen, according to Ramirez. So, he says this about that. He goes, when I heard the news, right, that the people that tried to unalive his brother were dead, I knew that the demons I catered to, the demons I served, protected my brother. In that instant, I also understood my mission and my assignment from hell was to put my brother in jail, where he would be safe, not stand by and watch him end up in the cemetery. So your assignment from hell was to save your brother's life? I mean, I'm kind of wondering why the demons couldn't, like, I don't know, go put him on a bus to a nice rural cozy town for, like, a nice little Harvest Moon life, or maybe, I don't know, find a way to get him some really nice grants to go to school or something if you wanted to do that, or do anything else. I don't know why it had to be jail. But it sounds like your assignment from hell, like, was a net positive. Just saying. But hold on. That day, my powers increased in the demon world. I can't, it's so great. Okay. And I set out with a vengeance to destroy the life of the person who would try to kill my brother. I challenged the devil, yelling out loud, "You better do something, or else! That person better die! Do you hear me?" His answer came quiet to my spirit. I will avenge my fury and anger on that person, and you will hear all about it. Then you will truly know that I am your dad.
You are my dad. You're my dad. Wookie, wookie, wookie.
Oh God. Also the way. So that was a lot as it is, right? Like, first of all, I will avenge my fury. That's not really, like, how those words work, but okay. But also, like, you will know that I'm your dad. You know, like, I've personally talked to Lucifer many times, and he does not sound stupid like that. You know, he's actually quite nice in dark academia. He really is not dumb and goofy like that, but don't worry, there's more goofiness that, our boy pulls out here, right? Like, the way he describes his super epic standoff with the devil at the end, after he goes to a couple Christian hangouts and gets treated like a human being or something, he starts to think, well, maybe I don't want to play with demons anymore. And so, like, he has this weird dream where he just has this crazy, like, standoff with the devil, and in that crazy standoff, it's some shit straight out of Cuphead. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's some shit straight out of Cuphead. Like, this little guy, that's all I was seeing as I was reading this, because it was just some goofy stuff. Let me read it to you. Suddenly, the devil himself stood in front of me. He was over 12 feet tall, with gruesome-looking features and deep red eyes. I noticed that his wings were stained and dirty. As he spoke, heat came out of his mouth. I have given you everything. Wealth, women, TM, and power, he said in a deep, echoing voice. People fear you because of me. I was like a father to you, and now you want to throw it all away? Don't you know you can never get rid of me? I looked into his churning eyes, and what I saw made me want to run in the direction I had come, but my feet felt cemented to the ground and I couldn't move. I couldn't scream to save my life. If you won't serve me, he continued, then I'll have to destroy you. He tried to grab me and I backed up. You fool. You fool, he said, laughing. You can't get away. You belong to me. And as he went to grab me once again, something appeared in my right hand, and I looked at it with amazement. It was a 3-foot cross. As soon as he reached for me, I put the cross on him, and he lost all strength and power and fell to his knees. In shock at what had taken place, I continued running through the tunnel as fast as I could. When I reached the end of the tunnel, the same fear gripped me again, only this time much stronger and much worse. The devil appeared for the second time, angrier than before, speaking to me in demonic tongues, and telling me how he was going to destroy me. Jay, can you explain it? Because I can't explain it, Jay. I don't, like, just, you fool. He says that like 3 times in that chapter, by the way. And I, you know, I've never heard Lucifer say that once, because Lucifer doesn't sound like someone badly cosplaying Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. Also, damn. But this guy's out here getting money and women and power from the devil. All I get from Lucifer is shadow work and grief, okay? Seriously though, this book is full of cringe like this. It really does read like some kind of Christian Wattpad horror. Like, it's bad, dude. Look at this. When he's talking about marrying his, like, Hot Topic wife that he met in a dive bar somewhere, he goes, the union of our souls on that witch's holiday. Halloween. Exactly 2 years from the night we met was the perfect night for this dark ceremony that would bind us together not in the sight of God, but the sight of Satan. And, like, that's the thing, right? I said it before, but I'll say it again. He mentions witchcraft parties a lot. Like, more than just the times that it was some, like, racist, Romani caricature, right? Like, I still, to this day, do not know what a witchcraft party entails. He didn't really describe any of the witchcraft stuff that happened outside of his super, like, main character syndrome. But, like, all I can tell you guys is that, as a witch, my parties are pretty mundane. Like, they're pretty normal, in fact. We do, 4th of July parties, some grilling outside. We have some fun, occasional get-togethers with friends, play Jackbox games. And, I mean, I guess we get, like, a little demonic on Halloween, right? Because, like, I got this food-grade cauldron just for making sangria in. Like this thing? I bought this specifically so I could put sangria in it. This is my cauldron, and it's, like, food-safe and stuff, nice ceramic. It's really nice, and it really just kind of collects dust all the times I'm not putting some kind of party beverage in it, but, And I guess, like, this is also pretty demonic, like, I have a little plastic serving tray for, like, cheeses and meats and stuff that has all of the astrology symbols on it. I guess that's pretty ooky spooky. Could definitely do witchcraft assignments from Satan with this after I put some good, like, strawberries and and cheese on it. But like, I don't know, I don't think I've ever accidentally like eaten the spirit of Pisces or something because of a cheese board made on that platter. Okay, another one that had me cracking up because like, what, just hold on, just look. This story was another good one. So basically he goes out to a bar and like there's some undercover cops there that are flirting with this girl that he was also flirting with. And this is just the perfect time to show off how amazing he is, right? So, one night, I went out and met up with a good friend in the religion, an NYPD narcotics officer, who was also a warlock. We had already made up our minds which club to attend that night. He was out looking for girlfriends. I was looking for souls. I knew that night was a special night. Zarabanda and Siete Rayos, my two strongest spirits, were coming out with me, and they never disappointed. Dude deadass rolled up to the club with two spirits of Santeria-based religions just in his back pocket like Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Yep. To his credit, though, I will say, these spirits do actually exist in Palo Mayombe and Santeria, so he must have done some research, some googling, to get these names. But Zarabanda, from what I can understand, is a spirit of iron that helps with protection and gaining employment. So I'm not sure what he's doing out here to randomly attack people for fun, according to Ramirez at this party. He certainly isn't the kind to go stealing souls, question mark. Like, I'm sure he's got skills. He's described on this one page I found as a sorcerer and a shaman and stuff, but protection and employment, okay? Let's keep that in mind. And the other one, Siete Rayos, whose name means like 7 rays or like 7 thunderbolts, is one described as a spirit of lightning and fire, divine justice and righteousness that is also a really solid protective spirit. And that's just what I get from like Googling it quick. Like, you want to know what other deity is associated with lightning and fire and war and protection? All that divine justice and righteousness? Do you know what other god is associated with all those things? I'll give you 3 guesses. In fact, I'll even give you a hint. Another deity associated with the same thing Siete Rayos is a deity that is currently the top deity of 3 major world religions. Giles, now's as good a time as ever to mention that if you haven't read this book, you should. I've just started it, and I've already had my entire brain just like... So this is a great one if you want to know more about God. Very good. Very well researched. It's by someone who is a religious scholar at, I believe, Oxford University. Really, really cool. Those are the kind of books you should be reading to learn about your religion if you want to read something that's not the Bible. Yep. To get back to our issue of accuracy, though, let me just say that as a witch, like TM, like as someone who practices the craft of witchness, of witchcraft, as a witch who is practicing the craft, nothing that he talks about, nothing that he describes, like, in this whole thing about all the witchy stuff he does, is how, like, anything works. Like, this man's out here talking about specific religions, specific traditions, specific cultural groups, of which I don't have a lot of knowledge of and am not a part of. But I don't need to be, because the way he talks about witchcraft is, like, literally the way some Puritan minister from 1634 would talk about witchcraft. Like, this is not accurate to Santeria from what I know from talking to people who practice these traditions. This isn't how this works. This isn't how really any of this works. This isn't how what I do works. This isn't how any of even my demonologist friends' stuff works, you know? And so, like, an example of what I mean when he just describes this, like, literally as if he's about to go accuse Goody Proctor of being seen with the devil, is in this part of the book where, you know, he started to go to a couple Christian meetings, and now he's, like, waffling a bit. He's like, I don't really know if I want to be a level 6 warlock anymore. I might want to switch classes and play cleric now. But no. At this point, eventually he just decides to double down. He goes through this whole crazy thing where, like, I don't know, he lost his eyesight for a year or something, which is wild, and he even has in the back of the book his certificate of, like, legal blindness, which is, like, a wild move, kind of a power move, to be honest, but still, right? He has this whole thing. He started to leave the religion TM, lost his eyesight, as was prophesized in the beginning when he was a kid, where if he didn't serve the demons, he would lose his eyes. Well, here he is losing his eyes. But then he goes back to the religion, gains his eyesight back, and in that process, his demon magical witchcraft powers, like, level up 80-fold, right? Look, he goes, now that I was rededicated to the demon world, the spirits gave me a new assignment, and the power and ability to go with it. At night, as I slept, I was able to leave my body and fly over neighborhoods, hurling taunts and curses down on the people who lived within their borders. So, this is, okay, in case y'all forgot, this is like witch theory from the Middle Ages. Like, witches leaving their body and, like, turning into black cats and stuff and just, like, randomly making people sick. That's not real. Like, that doesn't happen. Astral projection is a thing, and meditation can have you visiting different spaces to some degree, sure. But that doesn't work like the way Ramirez is talking about it. What Ramirez is talking about is fantasy. Okay? It's tomfoolery. It's not real. It doesn't work that way. It's not what it is. It's not how it happens. This is fiction. And moreover, right, so here he is with his amazing deck of, like, however many spirits he's got floating around. Of course, when this guy goes around spreading the witchcraft aura off to all these neighborhoods and communities, when he gets to the Christian communities, nothing happens. Of course not. Somehow, despite Ramirez having these two incredibly powerful cards in his deck, none of his attacks affect any of their life points, because what Ramirez did not know was that these communities had Blue Eyes White Jesus in defense position on their side. What can you do about that? But no, seriously, hold on. Come here. If there are any Christians watching this who feel a little maybe bad about believing any of the Hollywood nonsense that they have grown up being told about witchcraft, you are not alone. It is not your fault. It is not your fault that the only exposure you've had to witchcraft has been tomfoolery like this. And it is not your fault if you find yourself thinking, well, maybe that could have happened, because I'm here to tell you that I'm not judging you for believing it. I may be a little concerned about how you came to believe this, but that's okay, because we're here to fix it. Okay, we're here to fix it. But because you've never been shown otherwise, because you've never actually, like, been encouraged to see otherwise, and because a lot of, like, our media and everything else still has very heavy, like, satanic panic elements in it, I'm thinking about that new movie that just came out called Tarot. Oh boy, I gotta go see that sometime. I know that's gonna be fun. Because of that, I can't blame you for thinking that this is what witchcraft is, right? Especially the way Ramirez describes it. All of the parties and the alcohol and you know, objectification of people and the you know, outside of marital relations and, like, all these other things, right? Like all these power trips and evil spirits and spooky, all this stuff, right? All this callousness and all this mean behavior. I can't blame you for thinking that this is what witchcraft inspires when the only people you are encouraged to hear from are other Christians who spread these kinds of lies. And I understand how you might think that people's, you know, descent into witchcraft is inspired by some kind of trauma or other things, as, you know, Ramirez here is clearly describing his downward spiral thanks to the parental issues that he never once went to therapy to resolve, right? So, I get it, I understand. And there may be even some of you who did consider yourself witches once, and had experiences like these, because you thought that's what being a witch entailed. Remember, again, I said we've talked about it. We've already talked about ex-witches turned Christians, and there was one of which who was very insistent that leaving witchcraft felt like getting jumped out of a gang. A lot of people jump into witchcraft thinking that this is what witchcraft is, that this is what it's about, doing these kinds of things, being these kinds of hard-hearted people, you know, doing these kinds of really not super healthy behaviors, right? But that's not what it is. It's not. I'm a witch. I don't do any of the stuff this guy talks about. My most fun things that I do after I'm done doing my work for the day is, like, playing Pikmin 3, or, like, I don't know, reading a book, right? Like, I don't go prowling the street looking for people to convert. I mean, hell, shit, I've said more than once that witchcraft is not for everyone, and not everyone should be one, right? Like, I'm not sitting here trying to convince people to think that they should do their religion the way I do mine, because my path is not everyone's. I understand that. The truth is, though, that what we in modern times call witchcraft is not what witchcraft used to be. And people like Ramirez are very much operating off of these stereotypes and assumptions that, as I said, come out of, like, 1634. The witchcraft of the Bible that was being talked about was, like, specifically fraudulent and harmful magic, which, like, sure, if Ramirez was actually out here doing any of this terrible stuff, like, that sucks, right? Not just because, oh my god, the Bible says, but because that sucks. Because why are you randomly being a menace to people? But what no one tells you is that magic is an integral part of religion. And we have archaeological evidence of Jewish and early Christian magic, right? Like amulets of scripture that people would tuck into their pocket to ward off illness or even scorpions. There are also like things like the Jewish mezuzah, right? Which is literally like some bit of scripture that goes onto the doorpost for protection of the house. There are Christian things like the Eucharist itself, which is thought to be insanely protective and powerful. And all kinds of other folk charms, folk spells, narrative spells where they tell stories about Jesus and Mary in order to ward off evil. Like, there are so many bits of folk magic, folk culture in Christianity, and also so many signs that in Judaism, exorcism was once a really powerful form of not only magic, but healthcare, right? Like, to the point that pagans in antiquity would be seeking out Jewish exorcists for help with evil spirits. And you can also see this again in the Bible, Leviticus 14. If you've ever read Leviticus 14, this is a ritual, because back then they didn't have germ theory, and magic and medicine and miracle were all the same thing. So in order to cure a man of leprosy, they would have this really elaborate ritual that would go on and, help this man be cleansed so he could participate again in religious life. But that's the power of God, you'll say. And I'm here to tell you that that doesn't change that God is also not of the physical realm. Like Zarabanda and Siete Rayos, God is a spiritual entity. God is a spiritual being. He is God, but he's also a spirit. The top one, sure, the Most High, but still spiritual and intangible. You're still doing the exact same steps as any other magician when you call on God. When you ask him to, protect you, when you do like as the Catholics do, and you start sprinkling holy water and holy salt and stuff, when you start, calling down the fire and all the other prophetic apostolic stuff, you're doing the same steps as any other magician with any other deity, with any other spirit. It's just that you have put God in that placeholder spot instead of other spirits. And now here's where we're going to put on our serious hats a little bit again, because when it comes to the truth about witchcraft, we got to take another serious moment. Okay, we got to look at this book and see that there's something here that has really nothing to do with witchcraft as we understand it in the modern era. And that is the way John portrays his character in this book. So throughout the book, we see his character devolve further and further into this icky, hateful, bitter mass of gunk, right? And he wants you to believe that all of this has to do with the spirits he's working with and the religion, TM. But I will tell you this. I am, let me remind you again. I, me, and myself, I am a witch. I know other witches. I know tons of other witches, in fact. I know demonologers even. I know all kinds of people. I know people who work directly with the other demons I was telling you about. I just kind of talk to them on occasion. I know people who outright dedicate all of their practice to them, worship them even. And you know what none of these people would ever do? Ever? They would never harass a homeless man to the point of sobbing and breaking down. To my surprise, when we stepped out of the club, one of the spirits whispered, "Look to your right." There sat a panhandler in a wheelchair, begging for money outside the club. I fixed my eyes on him and went straight at him, knowing he was going to be my prey for the night. I was half demon-possessed when I got up to where he sat. No longer me. "Do you want to make a bet?" I said, a sneer spreading across my face. Surprised, the panhandler remained silent and glanced from me to Joe to see what was up. "Hey, come on, bro. Leave him alone," Joe said, nudging me with his arm. I shook him off and glared at the man in the wheelchair. I said, "Do you want to make a bet?" "I'm willing to bet the money I have left in my pocket to the money you have in that pathetic paper cup. That's the whole night's take, isn't it?" I added with a sinister grin. Edge. Edge. So much edge. "What are we betting on?" the panhandler asked. My smile froze. "Your life." Oh, please, it would be funny if it wasn't so horrible, it really would. But he gave a nervous laugh. "The bet is on." "Good," I said. "I can tell you your whole life story in 10 minutes and how you ended up in that wheelchair. Are you up for the challenge?" The man shrugged. "I got nothing to lose." "Only your soul," I murmured. Every ounce of my ball-busting self wants to just... Oh my god. Oh, it's so cringe. It's like, there's cuteness aggression, there's also cringe aggression. It's just, right? Like, oh no. But, hold on. So only your soul, I murmured. Tonight's your lucky night. As I went on to describe his life, I could see that I was breaking him bit by bit spiritually. What started with a chuckle and a smile ended up in tears and sorrow. I knew I had him just where I wanted him, to the point that I tried to force him off his chair and make him walk, even though he was paralyzed. "Stand up, you lousy beggar! Stand up and face me down like a man," I shouted. The panhandler crumpled over his wheelchair and covered his face with his hands, his sobs escaping into the now silent night. Joe stood by with a blank look on his face. I knew that as soon as I was done with this man, he was destined for hell. As I won the bet and left him sobbing in a pool of tears, I took his cup full of change and threw it into the street. Before I turned to leave, I leaned over to the man and said in a low voice, "You're a waste of life on planet Earth. Nobody loves you. Why don't you do yourself a favor and die?" As goofy as it starts, when I got to that point, I was like... And of course, this is meant to be a point in the narrative where we show, like, how far John has fallen and, like, what a terrible person he is. And, like, we can see that also with him trying to deflect responsibility for this behavior by saying that he was half demon-possessed. Therefore, it's a... Oh my god, get the bingo card. Get the bingo card. We got a devil made me do it square somewhere in here. We can tell that this is supposed to be, like, basically, like, rock bottom, morally at least, because even his, like, level 3 warlock friend over there, the NYPD narcotics dude, has had enough of his shit, right? He goes, "Now it's time to go," I said to Joe, jerking my head in the direction we should walk. I could hear his voice cracking as he tried to speak up, like he had a knot in his throat. All that came out was, "John, John." I looked up and saw tears in Joe's eyes. "What's the matter?" I spat out. "You can't handle it? Aren't you a devil worshipper as well as I am?" People in Santeria do not call themselves devil worshippers because they don't worship the devil, you moron. Oh my god. He just stood there shaking his head. "John, I can't hang with you no more, man. You're too far gone." That night, I knew I had reached a place in my walk with the devil that left many others behind who were in the same occult inner circle. As we made it to Joe's building, I sensed he had reached a breaking point. It didn't matter that he was a police officer, seeing so many harsh things in the world we live in. What he saw tonight pushed him beyond his limit. Yep. And it pushed me to my limit, too, at this point, because at this point I was, like, hopping mad. I was like, no way in hell. You're going to be on this kind of tripe, this kind of garbage, this kind of caricaturizing, stereotyping, racist nonsense, and then you're going to just put this story in here as if this was something you could just pin on the demonic, when in reality it was just your shit behavior. Are you out of your mind? And, like, that last part, I reached a part in my walk with the devil where I was all alone. Like, there's something to be said for the adversarial path and how it can isolate you. The adversarial path, of course, being like a demonology thing, or when you work with demons, you tend to get isolated. But it's not because you act like a piece of shit, okay? It's because you actually, ironically, end up drawing better boundaries and being more assertive and actually being better at sticking up for yourself and other people, for the rights of yourself and other people. That adversarial path usually is the cause of someone being really against the grain and willing to call a spade, willing to point out bullshit when they see it rather than kind of, stay small and soft-spoken for the sake of cushioning other people's bad behavior. That's what really happens on the adversarial demonology path. You couldn't waterboard this kind of information out of me if this was something that I had the bad sense to do at any point in my life, because I gotta be honest, I gotta talk straight to John here. Johnny, somehow, if you found this video, because I know you're on this godforsaken website, come here, Johnny. Here's the thing, let me be really clear with you, okay? None of my friends, whether they are Christian witches, whether they are pagan practitioners, whether they are full-blown anti-cosmic Satanists, would ever dream of treating someone like this. No one in my circles who are witches and practitioners would ever even think about doing what you have described in that passage. For your sake, at this point, I hope this is all fake and made up. I really don't believe any of this bullshit happened, but I hope now that it didn't happen for your sake. Because this is despicable, horrendous behavior, and there's no excuse for it. There's no I was half demon possessed and I wasn't myself and the spirits and there's no excuse for that. There's none. Hell, you out yourself because the guy next to you, who's also part of this religion, seemed to have a better grasp on basic morality than you did as part of the religion. And again, if anything, I'll tell you that the people I know, especially the ones who work directly with real actual demons, not just different deities that you've bastardized, characterized, and slandered, ones who work with real demons, who also still are not at all what you think they are, they actually have a greater sense of empathy and justice and defense for the downtrodden than you have displayed here. This whole goofy ass freaking, oh, I have to win souls for the devil by being a heinous piece of shit, that doesn't happen. That's not real, John. And that's why I will forever find more in common with a demonolator and Jesus than I will ever find between you and Jesus, John. Okay? And to further make myself clear, I don't think that you were a piece of shit because of the spirits. I'm pretty sure I've made that clear, but I don't think that you were a piece of shit because of spirits. I don't think you were a piece of shit because of the religion TM, or because the devil had you wrapped around his fuzzy little cuphead ass finger. Okay? I think you were a piece of shit because you had a lot of issues that you just did not ever work through and did not want to work through. And listen, it's understandable, right? That, bad experiences in life can make us into really just hard-hearted, chip on the shoulder, really, nasty people, right? That's what trauma can do. Not what it always does, but what it can do. And there's room for grace for that to some extent. But it does not excuse it, right? We can understand the behavior, especially caused by trauma and stuff, and a really harsh upbringing or whatever, but it does not excuse the behavior. But here's the thing. The reason I think you still are a piece of shit, John, is because with all of the racism and purposeful misrepresentation already talked about and out of the way, that kind of adds to my case here. The reason I think you're a piece of shit, besides all of that still today, is because you clearly never learned a single thing from this experience. If, that is, I suspend my disbelief and pretend any of this happened. Because without a shred, without a scrap of self-awareness, you turned around, converted to Christianity, and then did the same thing as you did to that homeless man in your story to someone else. Only this time, you kind of switched jerseys halfway through the game and started kicking the ball for the other side. You did this exact same thing with someone who was part of the religion. Or do you not remember this part of the book, right? So here we have a person named Daisy, who was apparently a Santeria from a few years back. And so this person, was part of the religion. And so it goes like this, right? Several months went by from when John had started kind of tiptoeing into Christianity, and one evening I was at my mother's house when a longtime family friend named Daisy, a Santeria from years back, showed up for a visit. As we all gathered in the living room, I turned to her and said, "Daisy, how's your life?" Weird question to ask, but whatever. "My life is fine, John," she said. "I'm serving the saints and doing very well." "Daisy, you're not serving any saints at all. You're serving the devil and his demons in Santeria, and there's no coincidence that I'm here. This is a divine appointment, and Jesus wants to set you free." So we've gone from witchcraft assignments to divine appointments. Her face went blank for a moment. "John, what are you saying? You are in the religion a lot longer and deeper than I will ever be. You know the saints better than I do. Saint Lazarus, Saint Ilya, Saint Martin, and many others. And you know how this religion works. Why are you speaking about the devil when these saints are supposed to be protective spirits from God, guardian angels that God sent to help us in our daily life?" I shook my head. "That's not true. That's just a disguise. God doesn't need any help. He's God all by himself. This religion is the occult, and it's run by the devil and his demons. The reason they use these names is to disguise themselves and entrap people into the religion, because they know this is the only way you can relate to them. And at one time, I was fooled like you are now. Why is it that at every feast I went to for 25 years, and the feast you go to, never mention Jesus Christ? Isn't that true, Daisy? Have you ever heard them mention Jesus Christ at these gatherings, have you?" Daisy stared at me, her eyes troubled. "No, John, not at all." "So you see," I said, "this is all a masquerade. And another thing. Why, when you go to the feasts, do people who call themselves mediums get possessed and drink liquor and smoke cigars all night long and also curse?" Where do you see Jesus in this? Jesus Christ is a sovereign God and a holy God. I could see that in her heart she had a void and couldn't hide it. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she tried to speak, but nothing came out. Jesus loves you, and he died for you, I said softly. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. In a very sad voice she answered, John, what must I do? Denounce the occult and give your heart to Jesus, I said. He will set you free. Johnny, baby, earlier in this book, your little devil Sona over there was gloating about breaking the faith of Christians and that one Muslim caricature you had in there just for a little spice, I guess, and all these other people. You were so proud of being able to just walk up to people, spill their entire life's contents to them, and win their souls for the devil. And now here's the thing. The format, the method, the way in which you approached it now from a Christian perspective is the same. You nearly brought this woman to tears. You came out of the absolute blue, just totally just driving a wrench into her spiritual beliefs. You did this all in the name of God, as if that makes it any more disruptive, damaging, disrespectful, and just plain intrusive. And you learned nothing. Because this need to break people's faith is something that I'm seeing you do no matter what religion you're in, no matter what God you bow to. Like, they all have the same experiences, pushing people to tears, going on rants and lectures, poking holes in places they don't feel super secure in their beliefs. How is that a holy way of winning souls? And furthermore, don't let this opportunity pass you by? Since when did Jesus' love for us have an expiration date on it, bud? And so another sign for me, John, that none of this happened, besides the obviously scripted back and forth that we had here, just this uninterrupted blah, 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 blah. I mean, seriously, how absolutely destroyed my suspension of disbelief is when you let her talk without interrupting her that entire time, John, I gotta say. And so another tip for me that none of this happened, as well as a sign that this Holy Spirit you were talking to later at Daisy's funeral was not holy at all. Here we go. Goes like this. It's this right here, right? So we find out that Daisy actually had cancer and she passed away from that, which is very unfortunate. But the funeral was held by, other people of Santeria. And so John shows up to pay his respects, and everyone just kind of avoids him and stuff. And so John says, all I did was smile and make my way to the casket to pay my respects to Daisy. As I came back out to the lobby, many of those in the occult did not look at me or say a word to me. I was their enemy. They looked jittery and uncomfortable, pacing back and forth. I started to pray silently, asking the Holy Spirit what was going on. He said to me, what does darkness have to do with the light? I guess the Holy Spirit, forgot about Isaiah 45:7. Or even Psalm 139, 10 through 11. Somehow. And, I think since God made both light and dark, that they've got a lot to do with each other, and that God has a lot to do with them. Ta-da! In fact, see this demon deck? I've got another one, the angel deck, that actually has the angels of the 72 names of God. One of those angels, his name is Oma Mia, which means God hidden in darkness. So I will reiterate, this is bullshit. John does not know his own religion, and this entire thing is just one gigantic, disgusting ploy to scandalize and frighten people into giving him money and following his ministry. Anyway, the last thing of my accuracy bit, and now that I've talked myself blue in the face about why this whole thing is such insane garbage, the last thing is that again, this is a story written about his life from all the way from when he was a kid. And you're telling me that he just word for word remembers all these little things and conversations. You're telling me that children speak the way he has them speak in the beginning? Because look at this. So, in the beginning, he's talking about Christmas. He's talking about how he never really got, the toys he wanted because they never had any money because his dad sucked, right? His dad sucking is, a big theme in the first 5 chapters, understandably. But he's got a friend named Junebug. And on the playground one day, Junebug pipes up and he says, man, Christmas is my favorite holiday. Christmas at my house is always the best time of year. We always get the very best. My father always does the right thing. Huh? Things no kid ever said. What kid is thinking of, wow, it sure is great that my father has always done the right thing for our house and our family name. What? But again, this reads like the author of a story trying to really grind your nose in the point they're trying to make, and really make sure that you catch it and that you do not think or interpret or intuit anything else in what they're trying to show you in their narrative. That's called being heavy-handed, right? That's called being on the nose. Which, I mean, like, given the audience of this book, I guess you kind of got to be a little heavy-handed for them to understand and, like, connect dots, right? Like, you have to kind of take their hand and pencil and connect one dot to the other for them. I get it. But, like, it's just more evidence to me as a writer now, looking at literary devices and literary elements, that this did not happen, because you would not need to so forcibly hold my hand to get me to understand this point if it did. And Muhammad the Muslim and the Indian chief Tawada, these are what we could call flat characters, right? Besides calling them what they are, which is caricatures. They're also literary devices in that their only purpose is to highlight some point the author's trying to make and then disappear and never be seen again. They have no agency. They have no agency of their own. They have no purpose outside, like, a brief point of catalyst or you know, moralizing for the main character. They are absolutely useless in every way except for these brief moments. But there's also the heavy-handedness as he becomes a Christian, right? Like, the way Junebug talks is one thing, but then we have later, when he converts, he's looking around and saying, how could a bunch of people with different color skin and from different social and economic backgrounds all get along? Only in a make-believe world could something like this occur. So as he's acting in the middle of this Christian thing he's in, like he's never heard about Jesus before, he starts saying stuff like that. And that's crazy, because he's certainly living in a make-believe world if he thinks that Christians have not actively participated, if not outright created, some heinous stuff in the name of God. Like, yeah, no one with a cross around their neck has ever been a piece of shit before. No one has ever done weird things like, I don't know, wear pointy white hats and burn crosses in a field and think of people to terrorize of a certain demographic before in the name of God. It's like he's never heard of the fact that, you know, in a waspy-ass country like this, the people doing the bad things generally tend to be of the cultural majority, which in this country of waspiness happen to be Christians. But even if Jesus is all about that, you know, love thy enemy, love thy neighbor stuff, and we've just done it really, really bad, this does not suddenly validate Ramirez's little shtick here, where it's like, well, just change your religion and suddenly you're a good person. We've already talked about why Ramirez is basically the same exact person, just in a different font. And all of this, as we get past his baptism into Christianity, where I kid you not, he literally had a everyone clapped moment. He had a standing ovation, even, after attacking the priest like 4 times in the narrative, or whatever. We finally get to the last part of our crap test, and that is his purpose. I asked you to discuss that question earlier, think about it for a little bit. I gave some of my thoughts already, but by the end of the book, this is where the purpose becomes painfully clear. So we'll get into that, and then we'll get the hell out of here and get some food. Jeez. But just as I had you think about that question, right, so too does Ramirez have a question for you all. At the end of this book, after he wraps up his crazy journey of doing some, like, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Zek Bell, Pokemon, Persona 5 level bullshit for 200 pages, he asks the audience this. I have a question for you to think about. If today were your last day on Earth, where would you spend eternity? There is no escaping the courtroom of heaven. If you refuse the Holy One who bled and died on the cross, the one for whom God poured out his wrath against all sin, the judgment is where you will stand. The Bible says it is appointed unto man to die once, but after that comes the judgment. Hebrews 9:27. And I mean, like, there it is, folks. There it is. Is it really an evangelical book without this kind of fear-mongering? I don't think so. But before we get too sad about this quote about, you know, hellfire, and before we start, you know, thinking about, oh no, I'm going to hell because the Bible says, let's go back a few centuries in Christian thought, right? Let's go back and see what a mystic like the Italian noble Catherine of Genoa, who was alive from like 1447 to about 1510, has to say. And to which I bring another book that people should be reading if they want to not sound like John Ramirez. But Catherine of Genoa says this. She says, again, I say that on God's part, I see paradise has no gate, but that whoever wants to may enter in. Because God is all mercy and stands with open arms to admit us to his glory. But I also see that the essence of God is so pure, far more than one can imagine, that should a soul see in itself even the least mote of imperfection, it would rather cast itself into 1,000 hells than go with that spot into the presence of the divine majesty. Therefore, seeing that purgatory is ordained to take away such blemishes, it plunges into it and deems it a great mercy that it can remove them. You hear that? Heaven is open, all can enter. It is us, the soul, who turns away from God and goes into purgatory, not hell, purgatory, when we realize that we are not ready to face God yet. When we look at ourselves after death and say, oh no, I'm a little dirty, right? Like, think about, like, you're having guests over and you haven't showered in 3 days and you're wearing, like, crusty sweatpants and, like, the house is a mess. Like, yeah, that's kind of what Jen was getting at. Like, you don't want to be in the presence of people you esteem and respect and love when you are looking like a wreck and when everything around you is looking like a wreck. So you clean it up. And that's what purgatory is. Purgatory purges, purgation, right? Purges you of all of these spots and dirt and things that would otherwise have you be really embarrassed to stand in front of God. That's why purgatory, or the baptism of fire, is here in the first place, right? When Jesus says, when John the Baptist says that one will come who baptizes in fire, bang, there it is. It's Jesus baptizing us in fire so that we can, be reunited fully with God and not have to worry about all the muck and gunk we've built up our entire lives. We are not damned to eternal hellfire, no matter what. No matter what these evangelicals want you to think, that's just not how it works. That's not how an all-loving God works. But of course, you can't get a lot of anxious people giving you streams of donations and hanging on every word you say if you tell them that they'll be okay no matter what. Can you? Ramirez has spun a diabolically fake and racist story with this book, and he's sandwiched it between two badly designed covers for the sole purpose of scandalizing waspy audiences and getting people to further fuel this feeling of embattlement that we talk about in Jesus and John Wayne, to fuel this feeling that, the faith is under attack and that Satan is coming to destroy us kind of thing, right? And by doing that, he can then paint himself as an authority figure, and a very compelling one, because he can paint himself as the inside man. He is setting up that ethos to really catch the gullible when he says, believe me, I was there, I saw it, I was in it. And I myself have seen that comment a lot from ex-witches turned Christians, right? I've seen a lot of people say, believe me, I know, I was there, as if their testimony isn't just as fake as any of this. Hopefully less fake, honestly. I hope it's not as tragically racist and stupid as this one is, but still. When this guy can paint himself as an ex-Satanist, an ex-high-ranking warlock, on the inside, seeing all of Satan's evil mechanism, right? When he can do that, and be that authority figure who's then turned to Christ, he's both a success story and a leader all in one. And when he's that figure, people listen. There's not a drop of Christ anywhere in his book. I will tell you that right now. There's not a drop of holiness. There's not a drop of godliness in that book. Not with all the stuff we've gone over. So, besides the flagrant racism, which is obviously the number one thing that makes me so upset and has had this be a much more serious video than I expected it to be when I first started reading the book. The second is the fact that, again, I didn't find this book. Like, I didn't pick this up in bad faith from Amazon's lists. I didn't go searching for something that looked stupid and ridiculous and say, yeah, haha, we can goof on that. No. This was recommended to me, I will say again, by a Christian who was once a witch and thought that this book actually was in any way legitimate. So that is like double egregious to me, right? It's one thing for me to just find stupidity out in the wild and be like, haha, wow, that's silly. But it's another thing for someone to read it, laud it as some great thing, promote it, recommend it, and think that it at all stands up to any of the academia that you actually need to understand God. I'm still blown away that a real breathing person looked me in my virtual face and said, oh, you read books? You read, like, actual books, scholarly books, historical books, legitimate peer-reviewed books? I read books, too, and held up this garbage. Can't believe that. Not at all. Like, to this point, I actually have to give, again, Jenny LeClaire some credit. She at least tried to kind of take a more, like, philosophical approach, at least, like a more, like, you know, let's think through this and work through this, and let me explain to you let me define some terms for you, let me tell you what's going on here, let me give you some examples, let me tell you how to defend yourself against, like, Jenny actually put in some work to make something usable and not just this absolute crock of mess, which is crazy. I did not think I was going to read a book that made me look at Jenny LeClaire and be like, yep, that's not the worst. Like, oh. And I can't believe I'm the person who's going to say this. I really can't believe. Because I hate when people say what I'm about to say. But, oh my god. Just because something exists in book format does not mean it is legit or credible. But when I hold up Discovering Christian Witchcraft and I'm like, y'all, I wrote a book about, like, what the Bible actually has to say about witchcraft. I know what I'm talking about. People will, of course, will turn around and say, well, just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's true. And then I'm like, okay, but, like, my book is based on, like, other books, on research, on, like, you know, a synthesizing of academia. And so it's at least a little bit credible, right? It's at least a little bit, okay? But no. Then these people come out with books like this saying, no, believe me, witchcraft is super bad. And it's, like, actual, like, donkey diarrhea. Like, yeah, now I have to say it. Just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's legitimate, good, worthy of my attention, or anything else. And that is exactly how I felt reading this book. By the end, I was like, well, that was a cute bedtime story, but it did absolutely nothing except make me really irritated at the insane amount of, like, just micro and macro aggressions amidst all the other just blatantly incorrect, stupid shit in this book. And, like, once again, we find ourselves in a world where people just want to pray away the hard things that they don't want to think about. They want to literally just pull themselves up by their bootstraps and hyper-individualize their lives. They don't want to actually work as a community to dismantle systems of racism, classism, and all of these other things that keep entire groups of people down. They don't want to actually take any responsibility or acknowledge any privilege they might have and work to kind of even the playing field a little bit. What they want to do is feel like they checked off their good person box for the day by throwing some money at some mega rich hyper dick pastor, and then also, I don't know, feel morally superior to everyone else who doesn't actually go to church anymore, because the church as itself is an institution that keeps people down at this point. No, in these people's world, if you come to church and just donate half your earnings to that mega church pastor, magically, you're exempt from dealing with all of this stuff about the world. In fact, all this worldly nonsense, well, you know what, doesn't even matter, because we're all going to go to heaven anyway, even though we're told to, you know, make heaven down on earth, but whatever, details, right? We're in a place where all these bad things that happen are not because of, you know, systems that a largely waspy Christian-dominated culture has put forward, but no, it's just all a result of individuals doing evil, bad devil worship. And since we're not devil worshippers, we can just close our eyes and pretend all these problems that affect society, and therefore all of us, just don't exist. And I think we can sum it up by saying that we live really in a world where it is easier to give a grifter like Ramirez our offerings of money and attention and loyalty to soothe our own lack of action in the world, than to actually give Jesus our offerings of resistance to oppression, shelter for the downtrodden, and genuine love for God and neighbor to bring heaven down on earth like they command. But remember, it was Jesus himself who told the Pharisees, he told them this in Matthew, right? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but the inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee! First clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside may also be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. And in all that, these Pharisees, what did they do? What did they do with all their efforts to gain a proselyte? And all their efforts to look righteous? What was that? What was that happen? Oh yeah, as Jesus says, that proselyte became twice as much a child of hell as before. Twice as much. From efforts like these folks. So listen, y'all, don't go straining out gnats like tarot cards, and swallow camels like racism and apathy to systematic injustice. Don't even act like asking God questions with literal pictures on cardstock is something to be concerned of to begin with, to be honest, because it's not. Literally, all of these uppity people about tarot cards acting like somehow picking up a little card with a picture of like a licorice plant on it is somehow going to do something detrimental to your soul. Meanwhile, they're yelling at people for, I don't know, anything, for having blue hair and judging the crap out of them and being awful. Like, bye. We have our priorities so out of order, and like it shows in stuff like this. It so shows. It shows when we're like doing stupid things like making a big mess out of Halloween, or acting like, I don't know, people just literally practicing their own religion and going about their day and minding their business is more of a problem than the city councils that don't fund like cities so they have, you know, proper schools and stuff. And in all that, you know, I gotta say, it's really important that I impress this upon y'all. Do not give people like Ramirez the time of day. Don't read books like this and think they're legit. Don't waste your time on stuff like that when you could be looking at something that's actually academic and important, when you could be doing something for your community, when you could be doing literally anything else at all. Because these are con artists and grifters who put their wallets above God, even as they look you in the face and tell you that they serve God. They sure as hell do not. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all nonsense. And I can only hope that that girl who recommended this book to me, wherever she is, has wisened up a little bit and is doing okay, because what the hell. So that was a long one, longer than I expected it to be, but it's also a more serious one than I expected it to be. However, we are now 0 for 2 in Christians convincing me of anything in these spaces. So it's not looking good. It's not looking good at all, and so far I feel like we've actually gotten worse somehow. We've actually gone even further away from the point. And so, that said, leave me a comment, tell me what you think about this absolute nonsense. All I know is that this was a horrible book, terrible, terrible story, a very obvious ploy for grifting and nonsense at the expense of people of color, and all around just a bad time. If you've ever read this book or anything else by this guy, let me know. I know that I'm never going to think about this again because I don't want to, and this is now gone out of my brain. Goodbye. And with that, I'll see you guys next time for some more lighter conversations, some more, normal programming as usual. So, see you guys.